Hey, good morning, everybody. Our reading today is from the middle of Matthew chapter 24. We've divided Matthew chapter 24 into three different sections, and this chapter is very interesting because in this chapter, Jesus is actually looking into the future, and everybody wants to know what's going to happen in the future, but unfortunately, it's one of the hardest chapters in all of Matthew to understand. Now, remember that Jesus lived and probably taught this teaching in approximately 30 AD. Matthew probably wrote it down in about 60 AD. And in the first two verses of Matthew chapter 24, Jesus prophesies the destruction of the Jewish temple in about 70 AD, about 10 years prior to it actually happening. And so that brings us to this middle section. And I want to read the first two verses from verse 15 and 16. It says, "The day is coming when you will see what Daniel the prophet spoke about, the sacrilegious object that causes desecration, standing in the holy place. Reader, pay attention. Then those in Judea must flee to the hills." That's a pretty cryptic saying. And actually that word sacrilegious object that causes desecration in the original language is really the better translated the abomination of desolation. An abomination in Scripture is something that is generally a horrible sin against God Himself, something where somebody purposely dishonors something very sacred to God. And this abomination language in Matthew refers back, first of all, to Daniel chapters 9 through 11. Daniel lived, remember, in about 500 BC, and he predicts this first abomination. And the prophecy appears to have been fulfilled when, in about 175 to 165 BC, when Antiochus Epiphanes was the king. And he was the king of a part of the great empire established by Alexander the Great. And during this time, they treated Israel horribly. And so Israel rebelled. And when Antiochus arrived on the scene to put the rebellion down, his army entered into the temple. And in fact, they set up the idol of the Greek god Zeus in the temple, and then they offered pigs on the holies of holies in the temple just to humiliate the Jews. That was an abomination. And so this reference in Matthew is a reference to another horrible event that's going to take place. It's Jesus' prophecy that the Romans are going to destroy Jerusalem and the Jewish temple. And that eventually took place in about 70 AD. And so Jesus is telling the readers that you will see the Roman army, when you see the Roman armies besieging Jerusalem, it's time to head for the hills. And the early Christian historian Eusebius records that that's exactly what the early Christians did. They headed to the hill country and a little city called Pella. Now, what makes this passage very interesting, but also very confusing, is the lack of time references in it. The destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, we kind of know about that. That's 70 AD. But suddenly, in verses 29 and following, Jesus seems to be talking about His second coming and a time when He's going to return. And 70 AD, and now it's 2020 AD, so it's been about 2,000 years, and of course, Jesus has not returned. And so the main lesson here seems to be something that comes to us from verses 32 and 33. It says, "Now learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know that summer is near. And in the same way, when you see all these things, you can know His return is very near, right at the door." So the main lesson for us is I think very clear. While as much of the chapter is unclear, this is very clear that we're to be prepared for Jesus coming at any time. So what does that mean from a practical standpoint? Well, in my opinion, one of the things that would be the worst thing to do is to get bogged down in all sorts of details from this passage that try to speculate what the timeline is going to be for Jesus' return. God's got a plan for Jesus' return, and we're going to learn in another verse or so that no one knows the hour of the day, and that no one really knows how either. We just know he's going to return. And until then, Jesus has given us a pretty simple, focused mission. It comes from John 15, but it comes from many other places. I like John 15's expression, Jesus' expression of it. He says, love each other as I have loved you. He says, by this will all people know that you're my disciples, if you have love one for another. So today, live simply. Love others. That will serve you very well.
If these devotional videos are helpful to you, subscribe to our channel and click the notification button so you know when we post a new video. And of course, please share them with others.